The 2011 NFL Draft has definitely been one to remember, with having a great deal of players leaving their mark on the league. One could even argue that this is the best draft that we've seen in the last 10 years. The top 10 of this draft is part of the reason why this draft is looked upon with favor. Within them, these top picks would come from Auburn, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Missouri, Texas A&M, USC, and Washington. 8 would go on to be Pro Bowlers, 7 would be All-Pros, and 2 would be Super Bowl champions. However, everything would start off with Cam Newton going number 1 overall to the Carolina Panthers out of Auburn. Cam Newton's road to being the number 1 overall pick in the 2011 draft was quite unique to say the least. After being dismissed from the University of Florida, Newton would decide to transfer to the JUCO known as Blaine College. Putting up numbers well enough for him to be named the JUCO All-American Honorable Mention, Newton went on to transfer to Auburn University. A Heisman year where he had 30 passing touchdowns, with another 1,400 yards and 20 touchdowns rushing, labeled him as the best quarterback available. As a rookie, Cam Newton came out of the gate with 422 yards and 2 touchdowns in a loss to the Arizona Cardinals. The 422 yards did in fact break Peyton Manning's rookie record for most passing yards on opening day. It was said early on by an opposing team player that they were glad that they played him early because when he figured it out, it was going to be hard to stop him, and that is exactly what happened. Newton became the first rookie quarterback in NFL history to indeed finish his season with over 4,000 yards passing, with an additional 14 rushing touchdowns. Newton also made the Pro Bowl, but the Panthers as a team still finished 6-10. After a slight sophomore slump, Cam was ready to make the leap in year 3, leading the Panthers to a 12-4 record and playoff appearance for the first time since 2008. Newton threw for 3,300 yards, 24 touchdowns, while having almost 600 yards rushing. A top seed put them in position for a first-round bye, where they would lose 23-10 to the San Francisco 49ers. Newton definitely showed his inexperience with 260 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, while also being sacked 5 times. The following year in 2014, Newton would come back and lead the Panthers to their first playoff win in 9 years, and a 27-16 win over the Arizona Cardinals in the wild card. The Panthers would later be taken out by the Seattle Seahawks, who would go on to lose to the Patriots in the worst way possible. Just before the 2015 season, Newton would agree to a 5-year, $104 million contract extension. That season is where we'd see Cam Newton at his absolute best. With a number 1 ranked offense and top 10 defense, Newton would win league MVP while throwing for 3,800 yards, 35 touchdowns, and 10 rushing touchdowns, while leading the Carolina Panthers to a 15-1 record. After beating the Seahawks and destroying the Cardinals in the NFC Championship, the Panthers were now ready to play the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl, a game where Cam Newton or the Panthers never really recovered from. While Cam Newton was shut down, you could also say that he pretty much gave up by not trying to just jump on a loose ball. The years following is where the Panthers as a team fell apart and the once MVP quarterback became injury prone. After tearing his rotator cuff, Newton then needed surgery again on his right shoulder. After playing in 2 games in 2019, Newton would then be done for the season with another foot injury. The Panthers would then release him following the season, and that is where he'd signed with the New England Patriots, replacing the great Tom Brady. Just weird all around to say the least. With up and down performances throughout the season, Newton would only have 8 passing touchdowns, while the Patriots finished 7-9, but he did at least get another contract. The second pick following Cam would be Von Miller, coming out of Texas A&M, taken by the Denver Broncos. Miller was a 2-time All-Big 12 and All-American player, while having 27.5 sacks and 39 tackles for loss in his final 2 seasons in college. He spent the time playing both defensive end and linebacker, and in the scheme of the Broncos, he'd officially be an outside linebacker. Von Miller would literally start off his career with a forced fumble versus the Oakland Raiders. An all-around great rookie season will be produced by him, having 11.5 sacks, 29 QB hits, and 64 tackles. This was also good enough for him to win Defensive Rookie of the Year and get his first Pro Bowl selection. There was no second-year fall-off here. Miller came back in 2012 with 10 sacks in his first 9 games, along with 30 quarterback hurries, and at one point, Von Miller was also an MVP candidate too. Finishing his second year with 18.5 sacks, 28 tackles for loss, and 25 quarterback hits, not only was Von Miller a Pro Bowler and All-Pro, but he was also the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year behind J.J. Watt. The Broncos at this time would finish 13-3 in their first year with Peyton Manning, but a double overtime loss to the Baltimore Ravens, who would go on to win the Super Bowl in the divisional round, ended their season. While already being seen as a top player at his position, Miller's 2013 season went wrong in just about every way possible. He'd first be suspended 6 games for violating the league policy and also tried to cheat a drug test. Following that, he would then tear his ACL too. He would come back in 2014 with 14 sacks however. But it was 2015 where it all came together for Von Miller and the Denver Broncos. With the Broncos having a 12-4 record, they'd have a top 5 record, while Miller became the 3rd fastest player to reach 50 sacks while also being an All-Pro. Miller then ruined Cam Newton in the Panthers Super Bowl by winning Super Bowl MVP with 6 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. His great performance got him a 6-year, $114 million extension, which made him the highest paid defensive player in NFL history. There wouldn't be any drop-off in play following the Broncos' Super Bowl win for Von Miller. Since then, he's had 3 double-digit sack seasons and 4 Pro Bowl selections while never having less than 8 sacks. With the drop-off in sacks in 2019, followed by a season-ending injury just before the 2020 season, it'll be interesting to see how he comes back in 2021, now at age 32. The 3rd pick in this draft was defensive tackle Marcel Dareus out of Alabama, taken by the Buffalo Bills. Dareus was an All-SEC player and a national champion in 2010. At the time of the draft, he was the highest selected Alabama defensive lineman in their history and the highest Alabama defensive player taken since Cornelius Bennett in 1987. Dareus would start in all 16 games and have 5.5 sacks as a rookie. By year 3, he'd make his first Pro Bowl as a replacement player with 46 tackles and 7.5 sacks. With the Buffalo Bills just missing the playoffs with a 9-7 record while having a 4th-ranked defense, the team saw their 24-year-old defensive lineman at his best with 10 sacks while making the Pro Bowl and All-Pro. Following what proved to be the best season of his career, Dareus earned a new 6-year, $95 million contract extension, a contract that he unfortunately never lived up to. He would never have more than 3.5 sacks again in a season, and 2 years after that is when Marcel Dareus was traded to the Jacksonville Jaguars in 2017, rejoining former Bills head coach Doug Marrone. He'd play in 9 games and even be in the AFC Championship. Playing another 15 games the following year, the NFL saw the end of Marcel Dareus after season-ending surgery in 2019 with a declined option from Jacksonville on his deal right after. A.J. Green was the 4th pick and the first wide receiver taken by the Cincinnati Bengals out of UGA. A 3-time All-SEC player and 2-time All-American, Green was seen by many as the best receiver in the draft while also becoming the highest drafted UGA wide receiver since Lindsey Scott, who went 13th overall in 1984. With Chad Johnson now gone, along came A.J. Green, whose impact will be felt all throughout 2011 by leading all rookies in receptions and receiving yards while also making the Pro Bowl as well, the first of his 7 straight to start his career. He'd easily become the go-to target for Andy Dalton, who would in some cases force him the ball. The highest marks of his career came in 2013, where he had 98 catches, over 1,400 yards, and 11 touchdowns when the Bengals were one and done in the playoffs. It's unfortunate that Cincinnati couldn't go further than just a wild card, despite making the playoffs 5 years in a row to start Green's career. With a Bengals team that went nowhere the same as before, A.J. Green would be on pace for over 100 catches, 1,500 yards, before ending his season short due to injuries in 2016, which began to cause his career to take a turn for the worse. As a matter of fact, since 2016, A.J. Green has only made 1 season with over 1,000 yards receiving. After missing 7 games in 2018, an injury in training camp caused him to miss all of the 2019 season. He'd come back a shell of his former self, putting up 47 catches for 523 yards and 2 touchdowns through 16 games in 2020. Leaving the Bengals in free agency, Green now decided to join the Arizona Cardinals, where I just hope to see him win. Speaking of the Cardinals, Patrick Peterson would be the 5th pick out of LSU taken by the Cardinals. During 3 years with the Tigers, Peterson was an immediate starter as a true freshman and would later be an All-SEC player and 2-time All-American. He was even a candidate for the Heisman at one point. As a rookie, not only was his impact felt on the defensive side of the ball, but also on special teams. Peterson at the time tied the single season records for punt return touchdowns while starting all 16 games having 2 interceptions. This earned him a Pro Bowl selection and an All-Pro as a return man in his rookie year. The following year in 2012 is where we'd see Peterson make the Pro Bowl, this time as a corner, with 7 interceptions, 17 passes deflected, and a league-leading 5 fumble recoveries. Doing all of this while head coach Ken Whisenhunt was on his way out. Patrick Peterson would end up making 8 straight Pro Bowls to start his career, despite only having 28 career interceptions. Pretty much no one would throw his way. Under new head coach Bruce Arians, Peterson and the Cardinals would go 10-6, but would still end up missing the playoffs due to losing in Week 17 versus the 49ers. The young corner was still a first-team All-Pro for the second time in his career. So much individual success gave him a 5-year, $70 million contract extension just before going into year 4. Building off of their past success, with a great all-around team, the Cardinals found themselves going 13-3, making it all the way to the NFC Championship where they'd lose to the Panthers. It's unfortunate that Peterson hasn't been able to be a part of a team as good as the 2015 Cardinals since then. With continuing to be a centerpiece for the Arizona Cardinals franchise, everything began to come to an end for him when in 2019, Patrick Peterson was suspended for using PEDs, which of course ended his streak for Pro Bowls. And after another down 2020 season, Peterson would be released where he would sign with the Minnesota Vikings and even change his number as well. So let's see what happens there. The 6th pick in the 2011 draft was none other than Julio Jones, taken by the Atlanta Falcons out of Alabama. Jones was just behind A.J. Green as the top receiver in the draft by a small margin due to his route running and injuries, but this didn't stop him from being an all-SEC player and national champion. In playing his entire career so far with the Falcons, Jones will also have 7 Pro Bowls while even being better than A.J. Green. His 54 catches for 959 yards were also second behind him, but the gap would go away in time. Jones would erupt in his sophomore season with almost 80 catches for just under 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. He then started a 5-year run with at least 1,400 yards each season in 2014. The following year in 2015, Jones tied with Antonio Brown to lead the NFL in catches with 136, along with over 1,800 yards receiving. After his first All-Pro season, he would officially be catching passes from the MVP quarterback. Jones in 2016 had 83 catches for 1,400 yards and 6 touchdowns, while coming up big in the playoffs as always to get the Atlanta Falcons to the Super Bowl. Even with a rather devastating loss, Jones would still have a decent game, having 4 catches for 87 yards. While Jones remained consistent since making 3 Pro Bowls, the Falcons as a team, however, continued to fall off. Jones led the league in receiving yards with just under 1,700 yards in 2018, followed by over 1,300 yards in 2019. Injuries would cause him to miss 7 games in the 2020 season, which kept him from only having 51 catches for 771 yards and 3 touchdowns, while the Falcons went 12-4. Jones in the offseason made it clear that he wanted out, and that was confirmed by Shannon Sharpe on live TV. The Falcons would trade him to the Tennessee Titans in exchange for draft picks, so let's see what he can do in the now contending Titans offense. Aldon Smith was the 7th pick taken by the San Francisco 49ers out of Missouri. Smith, unlike most players, would actually do just 2 years starting in college, where he'd have 11.5 sacks as a freshman and be a freshman All-American. Even with a big drop-off in sophomore year, he was still projected to be a mid to late first-round pick. Playing at outside linebacker, his 14 sacks and 2 forced fumbles were pretty good considering the fact that he didn't start a single game as a rookie. He would only build off of his early success by becoming a full-time starter, having 19.5 sacks and 66 tackles and being a Pro Bowler and All-Pro in 2012. The 49ers will also make it to the Super Bowl, but will lose to the Baltimore Ravens. After such a great start to his career, Aldon Smith would unfortunately never see this kind of success ever again. Getting off to a great start in 2013, Smith was injured in an accident where he was arrested for DUI and marijuana. Shortly after, Smith would miss quite a bit of time rehab for himself, but he would still come back and finish the year with 8.5 sacks. The following year in 2014 is where we'd see Smith get a 9-game suspension for violating the substance abuse and conduct policies. Just before the start of the 2015 season, the 49ers would call it quits and decide to release him. The good news for Aldon Smith, however, is that teams are still interested in him, and he decided to sign a 1-year deal with the Oakland Raiders. He'd play in 9 games while only having 3.5 sacks before being handed another 1-year suspension for an accident that he played a part in a month before the season. Smith applied for reinstatement for 2 years straight, hoping to touch the highs that he once had in San Francisco, but the NFL denied him, and in 2018, the Raiders decided to give up on him and release him for good. It was radio silent for Aldon Smith until early 2020, where he would get a chance from the Cowboys and officially be reinstated. Playing for the first time since 2015, Smith will have 11 tackles and 1 sack in Week 1 versus the Rams. After finishing the year with 78 tackles and 5 sacks, Smith wouldn't re-sign with Dallas, but he has gotten another shot with Seattle in 2021. The 8th pick in this draft was quarterback Jake Locker out of Washington to the Tennessee Titans. Being the second quarterback taken behind Cam Newton in this year's draft, Locker would do 4 years at Washington, having over 7,500 yards and 53 touchdowns. Some analysts thought that he would fall to the 2nd or 3rd round due to his inaccuracy and the team play at Washington, but the Titans were in need of a quarterback for the future after Vince Young and Kerry Collins' time being over. As for Locker, he actually wouldn't see the field much as a rookie, while being the backup to Matt Hasselbeck. His first career win wouldn't be until the following year, where he had 378 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 44-41 win over the Detroit Lions. Tearing his non-throwing shoulder sidelined him, but he was able to come back and finish the year with 2,100 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions, while the Titans finished 6-10. It wasn't any better for him in 2013, where a foot injury cut his season short after putting up below-average numbers through 7 games. Now under new head coach Ken Wisenhunt in 2014, Locker began the year as a starter, but after injuries once again, with it this time being his wrist and his thumb, he would be benched, and a shoulder injury placed him on injured reserve. And just after the season, Locker decided to retire due to all the injuries he had, and saying that he had lost passion for the sport because of it. The 9th pick in the 2011 draft will be offensive tackle Tyron Smith, taken by the Dallas Cowboys out of USC. After being an All Pac-10 player as a junior, Smith is the only player other than Von Miller in this top 10 to still be playing for the team they were drafted by. Smith has clearly lived up to being seen as the top prospect at offensive tackle while starting every game as a rookie. It wouldn't be until 2013, however, where he would make his first Pro Bowl and be an All-Pro. From there, Smith would make 7 straight Pro Bowls while also being an All-Pro for the 2nd time, helping create a top offensive line in the league while blocking for top running backs such as DeMarco Murray and Ezekiel Elliott would give him an 8-year, $109 million contract extension. A disappointing 2020 season where neck injuries caused him to miss 14 games would cause him to end his Pro Bowl streak, so let's see what happens going forward. The 10th and final player taken in the top 10 in the 2011 draft will be quarterback Blaine Gabbert out of Missouri by the Jacksonville Jaguars. In the 2 seasons starting in Missouri, Gabbert threw for over 6,800 yards and 40 touchdowns. Gabbert initially wasn't starting as a rookie, but after the release of David Garrard and poor play by Luke McCown, the young quarterback would get his stop. The result, unfortunately, was just an all-around pitiful year. He'd have a completion percentage below 51%, along with fumbling 14 times and being sacked 40 times. It wouldn't get any better at all for him over the next 2 seasons, where he had a combined record of 1-12 while dealing with injuries and going through multiple head coaching changes. Gabbert would be traded to the 49ers in exchange for a 6th-round pick in 2014. He wouldn't really see the field much as a backup until Colin Kaepernick was benched. After a 1-4 start in 2016, the 49ers decided to give Kaepernick another chance before moving on from Gabbert entirely. And from there, he'd signed short-term deals with the Cardinals and Titans, basically being a backup and even a 3rd-string quarterback. It wouldn't be until him signing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where he'd start to see stability once again by winning a Super Bowl backing up Tom Brady. The top 10 of the 2011, all in all, have had some pretty good careers all around, and I'm excited to see what the 2021 class will do. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked the video, like and comment how you think the top 10 of 2021 will turn out, and if you think they'll be as good or even better than this 2011 top 10. And if you like me, subscribe.